Welcome back to Following the Call, the series that we're doing on this book, Living the Sermon on the Mount Together. We're on chapter 16, and it is entitled Anger. So here we go. This is the verse from Matthew. You have heard that it was said to the people long ago, "You shall not murder, and anyone who murders will be subject to judgment. But I tell you that anyone who is angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment. Again, anyone who says to a brother or sister, 'Raka,' is answerable to the court, and anyone who says, 'You fool,' will be in danger of the fire of hell." So that is a verse to contemplate, and it's very serious.
Yeah.
But also, I think, quite simple.
Quite simple, and will lead us to living much more happy lives.
Yes.
If we observe the admonition.
Right.
And as Dallas Willard, who's one of the contributors to this chapter, writes, Raka was an Aramaic term used in Jesus' day to express contempt for someone and to mark someone out as contemptible. And he particularly focuses on this, on contempt as being particularly damaging because it denies someone's humanity in a way that can almost be said, at its most extreme, to be worse than actually physically killing someone.
Yeah.
Because you do damage to what is immortal in somebody by treating them with contempt, and that's a serious admonition, right?
Yeah. And there must be levels of that, but ultimately at its core, he points out that it's all rotten, and that what happens then is the isolation and being pushed away and excluded. That's what contempt does. There's no good fruits for that at all.
Right.
So that was kind of also my understanding of this verse, Jesus' commands here in chapter 5 of Matthew, verse 21-22. I resonated with Willard because that's kind of how I understand this concept. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But then Augustine also goes on to talk about how anger grows, or not how anger starts out, how it can be deceptive because it can seem righteous, or it can be righteous, but then how hatred gains a foothold into the heart and grows and flourishes. So I thought that was a good reminder.
Mm-hmm. It is. It really is. And I thought right away of the story of Cain and Abel.
Yes.
And what God told to Cain, beware that, sin is crouching at the door and will overcome you unless you are able to master it, right?
Right.
And I think he was talking there about anger because Cain was angry at Abel because Abel was more highly favored, and really the roots of evil are in our hearts if we can't master them through discipline, through laying down these negative emotions, and trying to be more of a peaceful peacemaker.
I was pondering that story because I think anger often goes hand in hand with injustice or perceived injustice. And it doesn't make sense, I think, from a logical point of view, why God would favor Abel over Cain. And I think sometimes, we can make comparisons to that in our life where something doesn't make sense and we feel like we're treated poorly for some reason, and then anger and bitterness can flourish as a result of that. So to me, that story also relates how we need to let things go and trust in God's mercy and love for us, even if it doesn't always feel like it's equitable. Like equality somehow doesn't match up with God's true justice. Like it's almost inexplicable or unexplainable.
Well, I think Dallas Willard points to this when he refers to this essay from C.S. Lewis, The Inner Ring.
Yes.
And I actually went and read that essay this morning.
Good for you.
And it's really, basically C.S. Lewis's point is like a huge impulse for many of us is to try to be part of something exclusive, an inner ring, to be part of those who belong, which necessarily means that other people don't belong. So we're either in the position of being unhappy and resentful that we're not part of whatever circle of influence. It could be in our profession, it could be, in our community, it could be wherever, or we're inside the community and looking down with contempt on the people who aren't because we're somehow better because we have access to knowledge. And anyway, and his point is like you can really hinder yourself and ruin your life if you're not able to overcome that sort of default mode of wanting to be in the inner ring or whatever.
Yeah.
And I think that speaks to the Cain and Abel story, right?
It does.
Abel was, for whatever reason, favored by God. We're not quite sure in what way, and
it led to death.
It led to the first murder. So.
Yeah, and I was also thinking about Paul's letter to the Ephesians, and in one of the chapters there, he writes about how the church in Ephesus, and how they shouldn't let the sun go down on disagreement or dispute, and how, and so I was just wondering what you think about that, kind of like a statute of limitations on how long you can be angry, and I think also Francis de Sales, how do you say? He deals with that in his contribution to this chapter about how we have to turn to the Lord for help with our wrath and kind of nip it in the bud.
Yeah.
So I think that's a really good advice from Paul, and I think, here we try to apply that every day by, if you are upset or there's a misunderstanding that is causing unpeace and anger, it's on each of us to be responsible for dealing with that.
Yeah.
Before
it gets out of hand.
Overnight.
Yeah.
Because
you will inevitably have those resentments and stuff. But I think the important thing here is then the attitude. Francis de Sales says, if you are like the psalmist ready to cry out, mine eye is consumed for very anger, go on to say, have mercy upon me, O Lord, so that God may stretch forth his right hand and control your wrath. And like the disciples on the sea, that was violent, and they were tossed by wind and storm, God is sure to say, peace, be still.
That is so encouraging.
And I think that is that's what sometimes not even necessarily with going and talking it through with somebody, but sometimes just by that simple prayer and then allowing the peace of God to rule in our hearts. So anyway, good stuff. Anything else?
No, I think that sums it up. But of course, we're always interested in your thoughts, and they're very edifying a lot of the time. So
yes, thank you very much.
Feedback.
All right, see you next week.